Dylan Carter had been maintaining the environmental systems at Harmony Research Complex for 6 months when he finally noticed that Dr. Isla Velnath was slowly starving herself, rather than admit that the facility's food distribution systems weren't compatible with Velkari dietary requirements. As the chief systems engineer responsible for keeping the joint Human-Velkari research station operational, Dylan took professional pride in ensuring that all the facility's life support systems worked flawlessly. But somehow he'd missed the fact that one of their most brilliant scientists was subsisting on emergency rations, because nobody had thought to address the basic biological incompatibilities between species. Dr. Velnath, Dylan said, finding her in Laboratory 7 during what should have been her meal break, hunched over genetic compatibility research while consuming what appeared to be her third emergency nutrition bar of the day. I don't want to overstep, but I've noticed you've been skipping the communal dining periods pretty consistently. The Velkari scientist looked up from her research with violet eyes that showed the kind of exhaustion that came from brilliant minds working far beyond sustainable limits. Her pointed ears and the bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin that marked her as non-human were currently pulsing with colors that Dylan's cultural briefings had identified as indicating stress and isolation. The food preparation systems are calibrated for human nutritional requirements, she replied with the patient tone of someone who'd explained this problem multiple times to people who didn't understand the implications. Velkari digestive biochemistry requires different protein structures and mineral balances. The emergency rations are adequate for short-term sustenance. Dylan examined the nutrition bar wrapper, noting that it was labeled for emergency use only and not recommended for extended consumption. Dr. Velnath had been eating nothing but emergency rations for at least 2 weeks, based on the disposal records he'd noticed, while maintaining the waste recycling systems. That's not adequate for long-term health, and it's definitely not adequate for someone whose research could revolutionize both our species' understanding of genetic compatibility. Dylan activated his portable diagnostic scanner, accessing the facility's nutritional database to compare human and Velkari dietary requirements. This is an engineering problem, which means it has an engineering solution. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Carter, but the nutritional incompatibilities are complex biochemical issues that can't be resolved through mechanical adjustment of food preparation systems. Maybe not through mechanical adjustment, Dylan agreed, studying the nutritional data and automatically beginning to design solutions in his mind, but definitely through creative programming and adaptive synthesis technology. Dr. Velnath's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that Dylan was learning to recognize as curiosity mixed with skepticism. You believe you can modify the food synthesis system to accommodate Velkari biochemistry. I believe I can build something that addresses the core problem, while you focus on research that's considerably more important than figuring out how to digest emergency rations without malnutrition. Dylan was already mentally cataloging the spare components and programming tools he'd need. Give me 3 days and access to the synthesis laboratory's spare equipment. Mr. Carter, while I appreciate the gesture, creating compatible nutrition systems would require extensive knowledge of Velkari biochemistry, food preparation traditions, and cultural dietary preferences that would require extensive consultation with a brilliant Velkari xenobiologist, who happens to be the foremost expert on interspecies biological compatibility, currently working in this facility. Dylan interrupted with a grin. I'm an engineer, Dr. Velnath. I solve problems by finding the right information and applying it creatively. You're the right information. Over the next 3 days, Dylan worked with an intensity that his colleagues found either inspiring or concerning, depending on their attitude toward engineers who'd become obsessed with solving problems that hadn't been officially assigned to them. He spent his off-duty hours in the synthesis laboratory, programming adaptive systems that could analyze Valkyrie biochemical requirements in real time and adjust food preparation accordingly. The device he created looked like a modest addition to the standard food preparation systems. A compact unit that could be installed in any laboratory or workspace to provide personalized nutrition that met Valkyrie dietary needs while accommodating individual preferences and cultural food traditions. The programming incorporated everything Dr. Velneth had taught him about Valkyrie biochemistry, combined with adaptive algorithms that could learn and adjust to optimize both nutritional content and aesthetic presentation. "It's not much to look at," Dylan said, presenting the completed nutrition synthesizer to Dr. Velneth in her laboratory. "But it should provide meals that meet your biochemical requirements while actually tasting like food rather than processed emergency provisions." Dr. Velneth stared at the device with an expression that Dylan couldn't interpret, her bioluminescent patterns shifting through colors that his cultural briefings hadn't covered. She approached the synthesizer slowly, as if it might be dangerous, then activated its interface with obvious hesitation. "You built this for me, with your own hands." "Well, with my hands and about 40 hours of programming, plus consultation with the most brilliant xenobiologist I've ever met." Dylan demonstrated the interface, showing how the system could be customized for individual preferences while maintaining optimal nutritional balance. "It's keyed to your biochemical profile, but the programming is adaptive, so it should improve its recommendations as it learns your preferences." Dr. Velneth's patterns were now cycling through colors that Dylan had never seen before, while her expression suggested someone processing information that fundamentally challenged her understanding of the situation. "Dylan," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made his universal translator struggle to parse the emotional undertones, "do you understand what you have done?" "I solved a nutritional compatibility problem using adaptive synthesis technology and biochemical programming. You created a handmade gift specifically designed for my personal welfare and presented it directly to me in private." Her bioluminescent patterns settled into a steady, brilliant gold that made her skin seem to glow from within. In Valkyrie culture, such an action is significant. Dylan felt his engineering confidence beginning to give way to the familiar uncertainty that came with realizing he'd accidentally stumbled into cultural protocols he didn't understand. "Significant how, exactly?" "Significant enough," Dr. Velneth said, her violet eyes holding depths that suggested his thoughtful engineering solution had just created complications that extended far beyond nutritional biochemistry, "that we need to discuss the implications immediately, before anyone else learns what has occurred." As Dylan looked at the alien scientist, whose obvious relief at receiving his gift was mixed with what appeared to be panic about its cultural implications, he realized that his simple goal of solving a technical problem might have accidentally created the most important, or most disastrous, misunderstanding of his engineering career. The question was whether he was prepared to learn which. The cultural briefing room that Dr. Velneth led Dylan to was designed for sensitive discussions that required privacy from both species monitoring systems. As she activated privacy fields that would prevent their conversation from being recorded or overheard, Dylan found himself hoping that his engineering solution hadn't accidentally violated some fundamental alien taboo that would end his career in spectacular fashion. "Before you panic completely," Dr. Velneth said, noting his obvious concern, "you should understand that what you've done isn't culturally offensive. It's culturally profound." "Profound how?" "Because my cultural briefings covered 'don't touch anyone's head,' 'avoid discussing reproductive biology,' and 'never refuse offered food,' but they didn't mention anything about the implications of handmade gifts." "Because handmade gifts aren't typically exchanged between species," Dr. Velneth replied, activating holographic displays that showed Valkyrie cultural frameworks in ways that Dylan's engineering mind could process. In our society, creating something specifically for another individual's welfare and presenting it directly demonstrates the kind of personal investment that activates the courtship seal. The what seal? An ancient recognition protocol that acknowledges when someone has demonstrated sufficient care, competence, and personal commitment to be considered worthy of formal romantic consideration. She highlighted cultural documentation that made Dylan's stomach drop. The courtship seal grants legal standing within clan structures, access to sanctuary rights, and provisional consort status that carries significant social authority. Dylan stared at the cultural data, his brain trying to process the information that his thoughtful nutrition synthesizer had apparently enrolled him in alien marriage customs. So by solving your food compatibility problem, I accidentally proposed. You demonstrated personal investment in my welfare combined with technical competence and willingness to invest significant time and effort for my benefit, Dr. Velnath said with what might have been amusement. These are the traditional indicators that someone possesses the character traits valued in long-term partnerships. And this automatically grants me, what exactly? Provisional consort status within my clan structure, which includes sanctuary rights that protect both of us from political retaliation, resource access that allows participation in clan decision-making, and social authority that could affect the scientific cooperation agreements currently being negotiated. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that suggested she was as surprised by the situation as he was. The courtship seal isn't just romantic recognition, it's legal acknowledgement that creates binding social obligations. Dylan examined the cultural frameworks, noting that the Valkyrie social system was considerably more complex than his diplomatic briefings had suggested. What kind of social obligations? Mutual protection, shared resource allocation, and joint decision-making authority over matters affecting both partners' welfare. Dr. Velnath's expression grew serious as she accessed additional cultural documentation, but also shared responsibility for maintaining clan honor, participating in cultural ceremonies, and supporting each other against political opposition. Political opposition. Dylan, my research on human Valkyrie genetic compatibility has made me controversial within certain Valkyrie political factions who prefer that interspecies cooperation remain limited to trade agreements rather than personal relationships. Her patterns shifted to colors that Dylan was learning to recognize as indicating vulnerability beneath competent professionalism. The courtship seal makes you a participant in those political conflicts, whether you intended to be or not. Dylan felt the weight of unintended consequences settling around him like a particularly complex piece of engineering equipment that he'd have to learn to operate under hostile conditions. And if I don't want to be involved in Valkyrie political conflicts, then the courtship seal can be formally rejected within a 72-hour period, dissolving the provisional consort status and returning both parties to their previous social standing. Dr. Velnath's voice carried carefully controlled neutrality that suggested his decision mattered more than she was willing to admit, though rejection would also eliminate the sanctuary rights and legal protections that the seal provides. What kind of legal protections? Protection from forced relocation, immunity from political prosecution, and sanctuary rights that prevent either species' authorities from separating bonded partners without mutual consent. She activated displays showing recent political developments that made Dylan realize the scope of what he'd accidentally involved himself in. These protections become particularly relevant when corporate interests prefer that researchers remain isolated and vulnerable to political pressure. Dylan studied the political data, noting patterns of systematic harassment directed at scientists whose research supported interspecies cooperation. You've been targeted for elimination. Not elimination exactly. More like systematic isolation, designed to make me ineffective through social exclusion, resource restriction, and professional marginalization. Dr. Velneth's bioluminescent patterns carried controlled anger as she showed him evidence of deliberate sabotage. Corporate interests from both species have been coordinating efforts to ensure that promising research remains compartmentalized rather than leading to genuine cooperation. Because genuine cooperation would threaten their control over interspecies trade. Because genuine cooperation would prove that artificial species barriers are maintained for political convenience rather than biological necessity. Her violet eyes met his with intensity that suggested complete honesty. My research proves that human-Velkari partnerships aren't just possible, they're extraordinarily beneficial for both species. That's information that certain interests prefer to remain suppressed. Dylan looked at the research data she was sharing, noting that her genetic compatibility studies showed results that could revolutionize both species' understanding of interspecies relationships and cooperation potential. And the courtship seal protects this research. The courtship seal protects both of us from the kind of political pressure that makes objective research impossible. Dr. Velneth's expression grew thoughtful as she accessed legal frameworks that showed the scope of sanctuary rights. But only if the seal is formally recognized through clan ceremonies that make the partnership official rather than just culturally acknowledged. Formal recognition that makes us permanently bonded regardless of political consequences. Formal recognition that makes us permanent partners with shared authority over decisions affecting both species' scientific cooperation. Her patterns shifted to colors that suggested hope mixed with uncertainty. Though I should warn you that formalizing the courtship seal would make both of us targets for elimination by interests that prefer researchers to remain isolated and controllable. Dylan examined the evidence of corporate conspiracy, then looked at the alien scientist whose brilliant research was being systematically suppressed by political forces that viewed interspecies cooperation as a threat to profitable separation. Dr. Velneth, when I built that nutrition synthesizer, I was solving an engineering problem for someone whose work I respect and whose welfare I care about. And now I'm learning that sometimes engineering solutions have social implications that go far beyond the original technical problem. Dylan accessed the courtship seal documentation, studying the legal frameworks that would make their partnership official. But I'm also learning that the most important engineering work might involve building connections between people whose cooperation could benefit everyone, even when that cooperation threatens the people who profit from keeping them isolated. Are you saying you want to formalize the courtship seal? Dylan looked at the brilliant scientist whose research could change both their civilizations, whose obvious competence was matched by her growing appeal as someone worth protecting, and whose need for partnership was being systematically denied by political interests who preferred their researchers vulnerable to manipulation. I'm saying, Dylan replied, reaching toward the formal recognition protocols, that building something that helps someone you care about is always the right engineering decision, even when the social implications are more complex than the technical specifications. As they prepared to activate the formal courtship seal recognition that would make their partnership permanent while simultaneously protecting both of them from political retaliation, Dylan realized that his simple goal of solving nutritional compatibility problems had evolved into protecting the future of interspecies cooperation from forces that viewed genuine partnership as a threat to profitable separation. The courtship seal's activation triggered immediate responses from monitoring systems throughout the facility that Dylan hadn't known existed. Within hours of their formal recognition ceremony, representatives from both human corporate interests and Velkari traditionalist factions were requesting immediate meetings that suggested his accidental romantic gesture had created political complications extending far beyond the research complex. "The good news," Dr. Velnath said, reviewing the incoming communication requests while her bioluminescent patterns pulsed with colors that Dylan was learning to interpret as controlled amusement mixed with determination, "is that the sanctuary rites are already active, which means neither species' authorities can force us to meet with anyone we don't choose to see." And the bad news? The bad news is that High Counselor Thane Korvik is demanding that the courtship seal be declared invalid because you lack the cultural education and clan standing necessary to understand Velkari social responsibilities. She activated displays showing the formal challenges that were being raised against their partnership. Meanwhile, your corporate sponsors are pressuring you to publicly reject the bond to avoid contaminating the negotiations with unauthorized romantic complications. Dylan examined the political pressure coming from both sides, noting that the objections seemed to focus more on controlling the research cooperation than on genuine cultural concerns. They're not really concerned about cultural compatibility or diplomatic protocols, are they? They're concerned about losing control over researchers whose work could prove that interspecies barriers are maintained for political convenience rather than biological necessity. Dr. Velnath highlighted intelligence reports that showed coordinated efforts to prevent successful human-Velkari cooperation. The courtship seal threatens their ability to manipulate isolated scientists through economic pressure and social exclusion. Because bonded partners have legal protection against that kind of manipulation. Because bonded partners have each other, which makes them considerably more difficult to control through the isolation tactics that have been used against individual researchers. Her expression grew serious as she showed him evidence of systematic harassment campaigns. Corporate interests have been deliberately preventing personal relationships between human and Velkari personnel to ensure that scientific cooperation remains limited to formal professional exchanges that can be monitored and controlled. Dylan studied the evidence, his engineering mind automatically analyzing patterns of systematic sabotage that had been disguised as technical difficulties and cultural incompatibilities. The equipment failures we've been experiencing, they're not random, are they? The environmental system malfunctions, communication breakdowns, and data corruption incidents have been carefully orchestrated to create the appearance of incompatible technologies while actually preventing the successful collaboration that both species scientists have been working to achieve. Dr. Velnath showed him technical logs that revealed deliberate sabotage. Your nutrition synthesizer succeeded because you built it outside official channels using your personal time and resources. So the corporate conspiracy extends to actively sabotaging research equipment. The conspiracy extends to ensuring that human-Velkari cooperation appears promising enough to maintain profitable negotiations, while never actually succeeding enough to threaten the artificial barriers that keep both species dependent on corporate intermediaries. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that indicated controlled fury. My genetic compatibility research has been systematically undermined through data corruption, equipment failures, and resource restrictions that make objective scientific analysis impossible. Dylan felt pieces clicking together as he realized the scope of what they were facing. But the courtship seal protects your research. The sanctuary rights include access to independent resources, protection from interference with scientific work, and legal standing to present research findings regardless of corporate approval. Dr. Velnath activated displays showing the authority that their bonded status provided, but only if we can prove that the current obstacles to cooperation are the result of deliberate sabotage rather than genuine technical incompatibilities, which requires evidence that systematic sabotage has been occurring. Evidence that can only be gathered by someone with engineering access to the facility's core systems and the legal standing to present findings through protected channels. Her violet eyes met his with an intensity that suggested complete confidence in his capabilities. Evidence that you could gather using your maintenance access, if you were willing to risk exposing a conspiracy that spans both species' corporate and political leadership. Dylan looked around the research facility, noting details that his engineering training was now flagging as potential sabotage rather than random system failures. The pattern of equipment problems. It's been designed to prevent exactly the kind of breakthrough research you've been working on. And your accidental courtship seal activation has given us the legal protection and authority needed to expose that pattern without fear of retaliation. Dr. Velnath's patterns blazed with colors that Dylan was learning to recognize as hope mixed with determination. But investigating corporate sabotage would make both of us permanent targets for elimination by interests that prefer their manipulation to remain hidden. Dr. Velnath, Isla, when I built that nutrition synthesizer, I was solving a problem for someone whose work I thought was important and whose welfare I cared about. And now I'm learning that the most important engineering problems are often the ones that involve fixing systems that other people have deliberately broken to maintain control over outcomes. Dylan accessed his maintenance records, beginning to trace the patterns of systematic failure that had been preventing successful cooperation. And I'm learning that sometimes the best way to solve those problems is to work with partners whose expertise complements your own capabilities. Are you certain? Exposing this conspiracy will make us permanent enemies of corporate interests that span multiple star systems. Dylan looked at the brilliant scientist, whose research could revolutionize both civilizations if it were allowed to proceed without sabotage, whose obvious competence was being systematically undermined by political forces that viewed her success as a threat to profitable separation. Isla, I'm an engineer. My job is to fix things that are broken and build things that work better than what existed before. He activated investigative protocols that would trace the sabotage through the facility's systems. Right now, the most broken thing I can see is a system designed to prevent brilliant people from accomplishing important work together. That seems like exactly the kind of engineering challenge I signed up to solve. Even if solving it requires permanent partnership with someone whose species you barely understand. Especially if it requires partnership with someone whose research could benefit both our species, while proving that the barriers between us are artificial constructs, maintained by people who profit from our separation. Dylan reached toward the formal investigation protocols that would expose the conspiracy while making their partnership permanent. Besides, I've always been terrible at following safe engineering practices when important work needed to be done. As they prepared to launch an investigation that would either expose the systematic sabotage of interspecies cooperation or make them permanent targets for elimination by corporate conspiracy, Dylan realized that his simple goal of solving nutritional compatibility problems had evolved into protecting the future of human-Valkyrie relations from forces that viewed genuine partnership as an existential threat to their control over both civilizations. The systematic sabotage Dylan uncovered through his engineering access made the random equipment failures look like amateur hour compared to the sophisticated campaign designed to ensure human-Valkyrie cooperation appeared promising while never actually succeeding. Working through the night with investigative authority granted by the courtship seal, he traced patterns of deliberate system failures, data corruption, and communication interference that had been orchestrated to create exactly the kind of frustrating near misses that would discourage continued cooperation efforts. "Look at this," Dylan said, showing Isla technical logs that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The environmental system failures haven't been random. They've been programmed to occur during critical research phases to ensure data collection gets interrupted at precisely the moments when breakthrough discoveries become possible. And the communication breakdowns that prevented coordination between research teams, Isla added, cross-referencing his technical evidence with her own observations of systematic research interference. Every time human and Velkari scientists began developing genuinely collaborative methodologies, technical difficulties would force them back to isolated parallel work that could be monitored and controlled separately. Dylan scrolled through months of sabotage logs, his engineering mind cataloging deliberate failures that had been disguised as compatibility issues between human and Velkari technologies. The beautiful part is that the sabotage was designed to look like proof that our species' technologies are fundamentally incompatible, justifying continued separation while maintaining the appearance of good faith cooperation efforts, which allows corporate interests to profit from selling bridge technologies that supposedly overcome incompatibilities they've artificially created, Isla confirmed, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with controlled fury as the scope of manipulation became clear. Meanwhile, research that proves genuine compatibility gets systematically suppressed through resource restrictions and manufactured technical obstacles. The evidence was overwhelming. Corporate conspirators from both species had been coordinating a campaign of technological sabotage designed to prevent the exact kind of breakthrough research that Isla's genetic compatibility studies represented. The conspiracy extended beyond just research interference to include systematic isolation of personnel, manipulation of resource allocation, and deliberate creation of cultural misunderstandings that prevented personal relationships from developing between species. The nutrition synthesizer succeeded because I built it using personal resources outside monitored channels, Dylan realized, understanding why his improvised solution had worked when official systems had failed. The sabotage protocols couldn't interfere with equipment they didn't know existed. And the courtship seal succeeded because it activated cultural frameworks that predate corporate influence over interspecies relations, Isla added. Ancient Velkari recognition protocols that can't be overridden by modern political manipulation. Dylan completed his technical investigation by creating a comprehensive report that documented every instance of systematic sabotage over the past 18 months, cross-referenced with corporate communication logs that proved coordination between human and Velkari conspirators. The evidence painted a picture of deliberate technological manipulation designed to ensure profitable separation while preventing genuine cooperation. The question now, Isla said, reviewing the evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy, is whether we present this through official channels and risk having it suppressed, or use the sanctuary rights to broadcast it independently and risk triggering corporate retaliation. Actually, Dylan said, accessing the facility's communication systems through his enhanced authority as Isla's recognized consort, I think we do both simultaneously. Present it through official channels to document our good faith compliance with protocols, while also broadcasting it through independent networks to ensure the evidence can't be suppressed or eliminated. The formal presentation took place in the research facility's main auditorium, with scientists from both species gathered to witness what was supposed to be a routine progress report on interspecies cooperation research. Instead, they received comprehensive documentation of the systematic sabotage that had been preventing their collaborative efforts from succeeding. The technical evidence shows deliberate interference with research equipment, communication systems, and data storage networks, Dylan reported to the assembled scientists, his engineering analysis making the sabotage patterns undeniable. Corporate interests have been actively preventing successful cooperation, while maintaining the appearance of supporting interspecies scientific exchange. And the biological research confirms that human-Velkari partnerships are not only possible but extraordinarily beneficial for both species. Isla added, presenting genetic compatibility data that had been gathered despite systematic attempts to prevent such research. The barriers between our species are artificial constructs maintained for political convenience rather than biological necessity. The courtship seal formalization ceremony took place immediately after their presentation, with scientists from both species serving as witnesses to the first officially recognized human-Valkyrie romantic partnership, while simultaneously hearing evidence that such partnerships could revolutionize both civilizations. Dylan Carter, he said, as bioscanners confirmed his permanent integration with Valkyrie clan structures. Accept the courtship seal with the understanding that genuine partnership requires defending each other against forces that profit from artificial separation. And Isla Velneth, she replied, her consciousness now permanently linked to his through sanctuary rights that protected both of them from political retaliation. Confirm the bond and commit to research that serves both species' advancement rather than corporate interests that prefer our discoveries to remain compartmentalized. The ceremony's completion activated legal frameworks that required investigation of the systematic sabotage, while simultaneously granting Dylan and Isla joint authority to oversee the development of new research protocols that would prevent future corporate interference with scientific cooperation. The investigation that followed led to corporate prosecutions, the dissolution of the conspiracy networks, and the establishment of protected research facilities where human-Valkyrie collaboration could proceed without political manipulation. The evidence of systematic sabotage became the foundation for new protocols that ensured scientific cooperation, served both species' advancement rather than corporate profit margins. 6 months later, Dylan found himself working as the chief of interspecies technical integration, coordinating research projects that combined human engineering innovation with Valkyrie biotechnology in ways that neither species could have achieved independently. The integration protocols are performing beyond all projections, he reported to Isla, who now directed the expanded genetic compatibility research program while maintaining their partnership through consciousness integration that enhanced both their capabilities. Human-Valkyrie technological fusion is producing innovations that exceed the theoretical capabilities of either approach alone. The biological research confirms that our partnership serves as a model for interspecies cooperation that could be replicated throughout both civilizations, Isla replied, her bioluminescent patterns glowing with colors that Dylan's enhanced awareness recognized as deep contentment mixed with scientific excitement. Though I should mention that our personal relationship has evolved considerably beyond the original accidental courtship. The evening routine they developed involved reviewing research data while sharing the kind of consciousness-integrated conversation that had become natural through months of bonded partnership. Dylan could access Isla's biological insights while she could sense his engineering approaches to problem-solving, creating a level of scientific collaboration that transcended anything either species had imagined possible. Any regrets about accidentally activating alien marriage rituals through creative engineering? Only, Isla said with the smile that had become his favorite aspect of their shared consciousness, that I waited so long to find someone whose solution to practical problems included enough personal investment to trigger recognition protocols that I'd begun to think were purely theoretical. The best engineering solutions, Dylan replied, are always the ones that solve multiple problems simultaneously while creating unexpected positive outcomes. As they settled into the shared research planning that had become their evening routine, a practice that combined their individual expertise while maintaining their distinct identities, Dylan reflected on the journey from routine maintenance work to partnership with someone whose consciousness complemented his own in ways that enhanced both their capabilities and their understanding of what cooperation could accomplish. Dylan Carter had started as someone who maintained systems that kept research facilities operational. He'd ended up as someone who maintained relationships between species whose cooperation could benefit both civilizations, one thoughtfully engineered gift at a time. And somehow, in the process, he discovered that the most important engineering of his career hadn't been technical. It had been the construction of partnerships that transcended the artificial barriers corporate interests tried to maintain between those who could accomplish extraordinary things together, if they were simply allowed to care about each other's welfare without political interference. "You know," he said, feeling their shared consciousness settling into the peaceful synchronization that marked successful integration of both their scientific approaches and their personal compatibility. "When I built that nutrition synthesizer, I thought I was just solving a basic life support problem for a colleague whose work I respected. And now I realize I was building the foundation for a partnership that could revolutionize how both our species approach scientific discovery, technological development, and the kind of cooperation that becomes possible when people choose personal investment over political convenience." Dylan paused, accessing their shared understanding of how completely their professional and personal lives had integrated. "It's either the most successful accidental engineering project in history, or the most elaborate way anyone's ever discovered they were meant to work together on problems that neither could solve alone." "Why not both?" Isla replied, her consciousness touching his with the intimacy that had become the foundation of their collaboration. "Though I prefer to think of it as the most successful research methodology ever developed. One where both the engineer and the scientist discovered that the most important discoveries happen when people care enough about each other to build solutions that serve both their needs." "The best gifts," Dylan agreed, "always turn out to solve problems the giver didn't even know existed." As they reviewed the research proposals for new joint facilities that would expand human-Valkyrie cooperation throughout both species' territories, Dylan reflected that his simple gesture of creating something useful for someone he cared about had become the model for technological collaboration that was changing how entire civilizations approached the challenges of working together across the vast spaces between different worlds, different biologies, and different ways of understanding the universe. Sometimes the most important engineering wasn't about building machines. It was about building connections between minds that could accomplish together what neither could achieve alone, especially when those connections began with someone noticing that a brilliant colleague needed help and choosing to provide it regardless of the cultural complications that might result.